A book one was all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's a marine biologist and the host of the podcast How to Protect the Ocean. No other than Mr. Andrew Lewin.
Thank you.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Andrew. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
You bet. My name, like I said, my name is Andrew. I am the host of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, a marine biologist and science communicator, talking about the ocean and inspiring people to increase their knowledge about the ocean and take action to live for a better ocean.
To live with a better ocean. I like your advocacy, Mr. Andrew, and we salute you here on Book 101 Review. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about what do we need to know about the state of the oceans. What is the current state of the world's oceans, and what are the most pressing issues they face?
The biggest thing that the ocean's facing right now, there's a few, but the biggest is probably climate change. It makes everything worse. The fact that we have more heat in the atmosphere, causing more CO2 to be taken up in the ocean, changing the chemistry of the ocean, bleaching the corals. Changing just the whole makeup of the ocean. It's really just changing the way the currents are running, the heat in the ocean. It's making everything worse, which is not good for us or for our planet. We also have issues like overfishing, where people are just taking too much out of the ocean without being checked. We have plastic pollution. That's a big problem as well. We just use too much single-use plastics in our societies, whether it be in Canada, in the US, anywhere around the world. We just use it too much and we just don't know how to dispose of it. And then there's also just water quality pollution, from coastal development or just runoff that has chemicals in it or pharmaceuticals. So there's a lot of things that are going on with the ocean, but I'm not here to be all doom and gloom. I'm here to kind of give hope that there are people, around the world, scientists, conservationists, business people who are working to really live for a better ocean. And they are, making breakthroughs in understanding what's happening in our world through science. They are taking action in local communities as well as international communities to put in policy to help communities adapt to all these different changes that are happening in the ocean, and also protect a lot of the vital resources for the ocean. So there's a lot going on, and that's what the podcast is about, is to spread that hope, to say that, like there's really a way forward to not only bring back the oceans of what they were, but also protect what we have, and to be able to live off them in harmony and sustainably, and with a big focus on sustainability.
Mr. Andrew, what role does ocean pollution like plastics or chemical runoff play in the health of our seas?
Well, essentially, when you look at what is coming off, so say we take plastic pollutions, right off the bat, you get, let's take an example of a plastic bottle that is disposed of. It doesn't get recycled, or it only gets recycled once. It goes into the landfill. It ends up in the river systems, or somebody throws it on the street. It ends up in the stormwater sewers. It ends up in the ocean. Now you have the ocean and the salt water that's breaking it down, the sun that's breaking it down. It breaks down into what we call microplastics. And then all these chemicals that make up plastics from the fossil fuel industry, so it's petroleum and like arsenic and all these nasty chemicals, they start to leach out into the ocean. So as animals ingest them, or as the chemicals start to leach out, either in the water column or in the animals that ingest them, and start to accumulate in the animals as they ingest more and more plastic, you start to get a degradation of the body. So the animal starts to die. Either they choke on the physical plastic, or the chemicals get into their fat system or their systems, and they end up dying from being poisoned. From our perspective, we start to see plastics in everything, not only in our oceans, but ends up in our atmosphere. We start to see it in air molecules. We start to see it in table sea salt. We start to see it everywhere. So it ends up being in our system just because of the way the amount that we're using and the way that disposing. I use the example of one water bottle, but just imagine you multiply that by a trillion, and that's really where we're at when it comes to plastic pollution in the ocean. It's just a soup of these microplastics that are hitting every part of the ocean. They even found ocean in the Mariana Trench when they dove the Mariana Trench, and that's one of the deepest places in the ocean. So that's a big problem in terms of just runoff. Chemicals, salts, and all this stuff that we use, pesticides. It gets into the water column, and that can cause a lot of problems from nutrient buildup, and we start to see these plumes of algal blooms, and we start to see red tide happen too because of nutrients that are in the water or chemicals that are in the water, and that can affect our coastal areas. That can affect tourism. That can affect just our health in general. Just the smell of thick algae breaking down is not good. So the way to combat it, though, as I say, we're trying to provide hope. The way we combat it is we try and regulate the amount of plastics that we use. We ban certain plastics that aren't recyclable, that are just wasteful and harmful to the ocean, that end up mostly in the ocean. And we try and do those single-use plastic bans. And we try to make sure that areas that have leached out chemicals, warehouses and ports and so forth, are cleaned up. And one great example of that is the New York City harbor front. That used to be just a pool of chemicals in the 1970s and 80s, and they've taken a long time to clean it up, but it's been cleaned up to the point where you're starting to see fish come back into the harbor, so much so that these are menhaden that are coming back, and you see humpback whales coming back into the harbor to hunt the menhaden and just outside the harbor. So you're starting to see more ecotourism. Like, imagine going to New York City, you get to shop all for all your fashion items and so forth, which is a lot of fun. You get to enjoy the city life of New York City, and then you get to take a boat just outside the harbor, and you get to see these beautiful humpback whales. So there's ways that we can combat this pollution, plastic pollution. There's ways that we combat it, but it really comes from pressuring our governments to say, hey, we need to make a change, and we need to ban certain single-use plastics.
Definitely, very well said,
Thanks.
Mr. Andrew. Very well said and
Thank you.
beautifully articulated. How is climate change impacting ocean ecosystems such as a coral reef and marine life?
Well, I mean, we're seeing it now, especially these days with coral reefs. Coral reefs are a sensitive organism. It's an animal, but it's an animal that provides a lot of habitat for a lot of fish. So, coral reefs provide a lot of biodiversity in terms of number of different fish species and invertebrate like crabs and shrimps and octopus and so forth, and they allow them to live on this end protected, and allow them to have a lot of food and protection. And so when you have coral reefs healthy, you have a great ecosystem. It not only helps from a biodiversity perspective, it helps local communities with, grabbing food from fish, like if they sustainably fish, and then it also protects them from wave energy. A coral reef will actually dissipate or control the wave energy before it hits the shore. So if you have tsunamis or big storms, it'll actually dissipate that energy from the wave, and it'll lower the size of the wave. In 2004, when we saw the tsunami that hit a lot of parts in the Indian Ocean and devastated a lot of parts of the Indian Ocean, the areas that were protected the most had healthy, intact coral reef, seagrass, and mangrove systems. And so keeping those systems healthy is always great. When you have a coral reef that is compromised by climate change, it means that it's bleached and it dies, and all that skeleton just basically dissipates away. And so you don't have that same biodiversity, you don't have that same security for the coastlines. And essentially, what happens in with climate change is that climate change heats up the water. And in a coral reef body, if you think about one coral, in the coral, the thing that gives it the color is the little organisms, the little phytoplankton that live inside. They're called dinoflagellates. Zooanthellae is what they're actually called. And what that zooanthellae does, it's a plant, and so it takes the sun and it transfers it to energy, but it also provides the coral with carbonate, like bicarbonate. So it allows the basically calcium. It allows bicarbonate and calcium, and so it allows the coral to take up the calcium and build its skeleton. And so if that zooxanthellae is healthy and happy, and it's in the right temperature and the right pH, then it can actually sit there forever and allow that coral to flourish and allow it to grow. But with heat and extreme heat, you start to see these zooxanthellae not liking the temperature range, and they get out of dodge, meaning they get expelled from the coral. The coral needs to like focus on its survival. You get rid of the coral, or the coral gets rid of the zooxanthellae, and then the color disappears. They become white, hence the term bleached. And so once that zooxanthellae gets out, and you have this bleached coral, if they can come back in if it's ready for it to be healthy again. But if they don't, if it's extended period of times where they're bleached, then eventually the animal dies. And then you'll get this destruction of this coral reef habitat. So it doesn't only happen with the one animal, it'll happen with all the corals on the reef. And so eventually that will be dissipated. So obviously not a good thing. The other thing that climate change does is it changes the chemistry of the water, and it'll affect the pH. So it'll lower the pH, making the water more acidic. Like I said before, coral reefs like a certain range of pH and temperature. If that pH lowers too much, the animal can't grow, can't take in the calcium. The calcium is not available freely for the animal to grow its skeleton, and then that skeleton will eventually dissipate. So two things really is how climate change affects the coral. And of course, there are ways around it. We have seen that some zooxanthellae have a higher temperature tolerance, so that even though climate change is increasing, we might see the success of a different style of coral reef in the future, but we will definitely see a difference in the loss of the coral reef that we see now. Those big hard stony corals, those branching ones, those beautiful large like plate corals, and those boulder corals will change into softer corals that may not be as resilient to other things in the future.
Mr. Andrew, how are rising sea levels affecting coastal communities and marine habitats?
Yeah, rising sea levels, again, a consequence of climate change. When you start to get an atmosphere that's heating up, you start to see glaciers melt and ice melt in Antarctica as well as the Arctic, allowing more fresh water into the sea. That increases the levels of the sea. It seems minimal when they start to talk about the increase of different sea level. You start to talk about, you're talking about a couple of centimeters, couple of inches, depending on where you live and what system you follow. But that little increase can really matter in low-lying coastal areas. So island coastal areas in Asia, in the Caribbean, across the Pacific. These areas are just above sea level in some cases. And so what happens is that water level continues to rise and the water impedes into the coastal area, like onto the beaches, it'll take up more and more land. And in some cases, there have been indigenous populations in some of these islands that have had to actually get up and move islands as climate refugees because they can't live there anymore because too much of that water is impinging on the coastline. Now, that doesn't happen every day, and it's not going to happen to a lot of islands just yet. But in some areas like North America and Europe and Asia, where you think, hey, look, we've got an established city, we have a coastline, but it's secure. What's happening is that sea level rise increases the storm surge that comes in during major storms like hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones. And so what happens is that wind drives the water up further and further into the coastline, and so it's taking up more and more land, destroying anything that's in its path or flooding anything in its path and causing more havoc during major storms.
How does overfishing impact the long-term sustainability of ocean ecosystems?
Well, I mean, when you look at that of overfishing, you're looking at the stability of the ecosystem, right? When you start to fish for specific types of fish and specific species, they have a role to play within the ecosystem. And if that role gets shifted or gets taken away, or that species gets taken away, that role shifts. And so the makeup of the actual community shifts. And the disappearance of that species might lose the stability of that ecosystem the way we know it. So, for example, on the North Atlantic coast, off the coast of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, basically the Canadian East Coast back in the early 1990s. We had to put a more in Canada here. We had to put a moratorium on cod fishing because there just wasn't enough cod to sustainably fish, and people weren't catching cod. And we had to put a moratorium to stop fishing. So we stopped the fishing. We still haven't gone back full scale, though it is increasing, and people are skeptical about that. But essentially, what happened is, the cod were like a big, bottom fish, and there was also haddock and halibut that are a big bottom fish. Those were being fished so much that they were being taken out of the system, and their roles within that ecosystem had changed. So that fish, what we call assemblage, so the fish community shifted from these large demersal, so bottom loving fish, to these small pelagic fish. Now, if you look about fishing and what it does for a community, it feeds a community by that community selling the fish, by that community understanding, by that community being able to live off of this and having a full living off of this fishing. But if you can't fish for those fish anymore, you're not going to be able to make money. And if you can't make money anymore, then you can't fish, and you lose what you've been doing for generations and generations. And so, the impact not only to the ecosystem but also to the fishing community is huge. We saw that happen with the moratorium on the cod fishing. A lot of people had to go move from fishing to the oil and gas industry, which is not an industry you want to continue to develop because it's such an up and down industry. It's bad for the marine system. But it was the only thing that a lot of people could do in Canada if they didn't have the other skills to become engineers or go to school. They were fishers. That's what they did, and that's what they loved to do. And they had to move away from that if they wanted to survive. So an environmental component to it, but there's also a social and economic component as well.
Mr. Andrew, as a marine biologist and a host of How to Protect the Ocean, what are your short term and long term goals?
Really to increase people's literacy on the ocean, their knowledge on the ocean. I want people to really understand, not only what's happening in the ocean, but understand the beauty of the species, their habitats, how the ocean works, how it provides for us, how we depend on it so much, and how we need to take care of it. We are the stewards of the ocean. We can affect the ocean in a negative and positive way. And right now it's a little too negative, and it's really affecting our planet, the health of our planet. So my goal with the podcast is, I am a marine biologist. I live in Ontario, so it's very difficult to do a lot of the great work that my colleagues do in science and conservation because I'm not along the coast. But my goal with the podcast is to really just start communicating things about the ocean, stuff that I love, the projects that I see that are happening that are really great for and have a positive impact on the ocean and conservation, as well as the people that are doing these projects, and getting my audience to learn about these people, to essentially fall in love with these people and the work that they do, just like I did when I was introduced to them and I talked to them. So that's the goal, is have people on, talk about their projects, but also understand, like help people understand some of the news that's happening, help them interpret some of the documentaries that are going on, some of the good and bad documentary shows that are going on, to just really, hey, this is what's really good about conservation in the ocean, and this is what's not good about conservation, and help guide them to live for that better ocean.
Good luck to your goals and
Thank
looking
you.
forward for more success, Mr. Andrew. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there want to be a marine biologist as well, podcast host?
The big thing is to persevere, right? It's not an easy living to have. Whether you want to be a marine biologist, it's a hard career to start, it's a hard career to continue. You have to be resilient, just like the ocean, and you have to, if don't let people talk you out of your dream. Make sure you stay with it, make sure you network, make sure you connect with people like myself to seek advice. Same with podcasting. It's not an easy thing. A lot of people are doing it. Some people are more successful than others. With podcasting and even the ocean, like, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a good communicator if you want to be a podcaster. You don't have to make money doing it. You can do this as a hobby as well, and you can really enjoy it as a hobby. And so, like, keep in mind for both of those careers that, do what you love. You can always have a side. You can always have a side career that pays your bills, and do this because you love it so much.
Definitely. And thank you for that advice, Mr. Andrew. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Yeah, the major book that influenced my journey was really about science communication, and that's a book called "Don't Be Such a Scientist" by Randy Olson. It was one of his first books that he came out with, and it really talks about how scientists really focus on when we communicate to people, we focus on facts. So we go and we target the people's brains. But people don't necessarily react positively to that. They find it boring. It's not as exciting. They want that emotional reaction. Think about, Daniel, the last book that you read. You probably loved it so much that you like wanted to continue reading. You didn't want to drop it because you were emotionally invested to it, whether it was fear, whether it was sadness, whether it was happiness. That's what you want to do. And this book, Don't Be Such a Scientist, talks about how scientists need to target the gut area, the stomach area, because that's where the emotions lie within a person's body. And so by going after and targeting the emotional side of people's mindset, whether you be tugging on the emotional strings about sadness in terms of a problem that we're facing, or hope in terms of showing projects that really do succeed in protecting parts of the ocean, will really help in getting science across to people and helping them understand, and not only helping them understand the ocean better, but also inspiring them to protect it.
Thank you for that recommendation, Mr. Andrew, and hoping for the best.
Thank
But
you. Appreciate it.
before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my Abstract Essay is already in fifth season, Abstract Poetry in second season, and my Book 101 review in fifth season too, Comedy 101 in second season, and my Food 101 in fifth season as well, Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in third season, and my Movie 101 review and Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in each first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcasts. And Mr. Andrew, what's the role of public awareness and education in protecting our oceans?
The biggest thing, I think it's the most important part of conservation of the oceans, is having people be aware of what they can do and how they can influence policy, which is government, in like influence the people who are making decisions that will affect our lives in the future, and our kids and our next generation's lives in the future. So if you can speak to, once you get educated and you understand the ocean more, and you have that knowledge, you can go and talk to your government representative and say, hey, you know what, like, we need to protect the ocean. I would like you to focus on protecting the ocean more, reduce the effects that cause climate change, reduce all the causes that cause marine plastic pollution and marine pollution, overfishing, and so forth, and really have those conversations with your government representatives. So that's really the biggest thing that we can do, is the power of the people and speaking to government representatives about their policies.
Indeed, the power of people. Let's unite and let's combat climate change. And what's your vision for the future of the oceans, and what steps are critical to get there?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of hope for the ocean, to be honest, Daniel, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the future. I think the biggest thing is that we need to vote governments in that will actually focus on the ocean, that will focus on like protecting the planet as well as economic development. In the past, we've seen governments, most of our governments have been one or the other, either economic development, which goes against in the environment, or environmental protection, which goes against economic development. I'd love to see a future where we can meld the two in either growth or sustainability of both economics as well as the environment, and really see us protecting and being the stewards of the ocean, just like our indigenous populations that live on the lands that we live on right now have done for centuries and even thousands of years before. So I think we really start to have to listen to our local communities, our indigenous communities, and the way that they survived for so many years, and the way that they lived in harmony with their environment. And we need to do that with our governments and in the future for our lands and oceans.
Mr. Andrew Lewin, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your podcast as well as your advocacy to the world?
Thank you. Yeah, if you want to go to speakupforblue.com, you can check us out. And always love to hear on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. Love to hear from you. Just DM me. Feel free to DM me if you want to hear more.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Andrew Lewin because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering episodes of the podcast itself, more and more empowering advocacy of the ocean itself. So, Mr. Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Daniel. Appreciate it.
More to come, people. See you soon.